I wish you were my husband, human. The entire hall was shocked by the alien woman's confession. Cale Thompson stared at his reflection in the polished viewport of the diplomatic vessel Harmony's Edge, wondering how someone who couldn't even remember to match his socks had ended up as humanity's representative to an alien empire. His formal Navy uniform felt like a costume 3 sizes too small, and the ceremonial insignia kept catching on everything he touched. "Stop fidgeting," Ambassador Sarah Chen called from across the preparation chamber. "You're making me nervous, and I'm not even the one who has to remember 17 different bow variations." 18, Cale corrected miserably. "There's an extra one if they offer me fermented kelp juice, which apparently is either a great honor or a test to see if I'll die horribly." The briefing wasn't entirely clear on that point. Through the viewport, Velara Prime materialized like something from a fever dream. Massive crystal cities floated in the planet's atmosphere, suspended by what their scientists called harmonic resonance fields, which Cale understood about as well as quantum poetry. The structures pulsed with soft, aurora-like colors that shifted and danced across their translucent surfaces, creating patterns that seemed almost alive. "It's beautiful," he whispered, momentarily forgetting his anxiety. "It's also completely impossible according to our physics," Chief Science Officer Martinez added cheerfully from her station. "The energy requirements alone should have collapsed those cities into the planet's core centuries ago. But here they are, defying gravity like it's a mild suggestion rather than a fundamental force." The communications array crackled to life, filled with sounds that reminded Cale of wind chimes having a conversation with a harp. The universal translator worked overtime, converting the melodic Valeran language into something resembling English. "Honored guests from the world of short ears," came the translated greeting, which somehow managed to sound both formal and slightly condescending. "You are cleared for approach to the Grand Convergence Hall. Please prepare for resonance field docking." Short ears. Cale touched his perfectly normal human ears self-consciously. "Could be worse," Martinez grinned. "The Zephyrians call us the Pink Squishies." The docking procedure involved their ship being gently lifted by invisible forces that made Cale's stomach do interesting acrobatics. When the docking tube sealed with a sound like crystalline bells, he took a deep breath and tried to remember everything from the xenocultural sensitivity training that hadn't involved him falling asleep. The airlock opened to reveal a corridor that seemed carved from solid starlight. The walls hummed with a barely audible frequency that made his teeth tingle, and bioluminescent patterns flowed along the surfaces like living constellations. "Welcome, Earth delegation," said their Valeran escort, stepping forward with fluid grace. Cale's first impression was of meeting a human who'd been subtly redesigned by someone with excellent taste and a flair for the dramatic. She appeared essentially human except for the elegant, pointed ears that extended several inches beyond what nature had given humanity. Ears that seemed to shimmer with an inner light that matched the corridor walls. "I am Protocol Specialist Lyrian," she continued, her voice carrying harmonics that the translator couldn't quite capture. "Please follow me to the Grand Convergence Hall, and try not to stare too obviously at our architecture. We know it's impressive." As they walked, Cale couldn't help but notice how the walls responded to their presence, the light patterns shifting to accommodate their movement. "Is the entire city alive?" he asked, then immediately worried he'd violated some cultural taboo. Lyrian laughed, a sound like silver bells in a gentle breeze. "Not alive, exactly, but aware. Our cities are grown rather than built, using crystalline matrices that respond to emotional resonance. The stronger the feelings in an area, the more vibrant the response." She glanced at him with amusement. "Right now, the corridor is picking up your nervousness. See how the blue tones are predominating." Cale looked around and indeed saw waves of blue light pulsing along the walls. "That's slightly mortifying. Don't worry. Most first-time visitors spend their entire stay broadcasting anxiety in various colorful displays. Last month, a Rigelian ambassador was so nervous that he turned an entire wing of the palace purple for 3 days. The Grand Convergence Hall opened before them like the inside of a cosmic cathedral. Crystal pillars stretched impossibly high, disappearing into what looked like star-filled infinity. Beings that were almost but not quite human filled tiered seating that seemed to float without support, their pointed ears catching and reflecting the ambient light like natural fiber optics. "Remember," Chin whispered, "bow 18 degrees, keep eye contact brief but not dismissive, and whatever you do, don't comment on anyone's ear size. It's apparently like commenting on someone's nose back on Earth. Kale nodded, then immediately started wondering about the relative ear sizes around him. Were there ear size hierarchies? Did ear length correlate with social status? Were his perfectly normal human ears being judged right now for their tragic shortness? A figure rose from the central throne, if something that appeared to be carved from crystallized moonlight could be called a throne. The woman approaching was tall and graceful, with skin that seemed to hold its own inner luminescence and long, silver-white ears that curved elegantly away from her head. But it was her eyes that caught Kale's attention, deep violet, ancient beyond her apparent years, and focused directly on him with an intensity that made the hall's crystalline walls pulse with sudden golden light. The protocol specialist leaned closer to their group. That is Lady Arinya, heir to the Valoran Empire and... She paused, her own ears flickering with what might have been confusion. And she seems to be causing quite the resonance reaction. I've never seen the hall respond quite like that before. The golden light grew stronger, and Kale realized with growing horror that every pair of elongated ears in the vast hall had turned toward him. Lady Arinya's voice carried across the crystalline hall like a melody that had learned to speak. I wish you were my husband, human. The silence that followed was so complete that Kale could hear his own heartbeat echoing off the crystal walls. Then, as if someone had struck a cosmic tuning fork, the entire hall erupted into a symphony of gasps, whispers, and what sounded suspiciously like alien choking. Kale's brain performed several interesting gymnastics routines before settling on complete shutdown. His mouth opened and closed like a fish experiencing technical difficulties, while his mind helpfully supplied a running commentary. Well, this is new. This is definitely not covered in the diplomatic handbook. Did she just propose? Is this a translation error? Am I hallucinating? The crystalline walls of the hall had shifted from golden to a rapid-fire light show that resembled a cosmic disco having a seizure. Ambassador Chen grabbed his arm with the grip of someone hanging onto sanity by a thread. What exactly, she hissed through her diplomatic smile, did you do on the walk over here? I asked about the architecture, Kale whispered back, his voice cracking like a teenager's. That's it. I swear that's literally all I did. Protocol Specialist Lyrian appeared at their side, her elegant ears practically vibrating with what Kale was beginning to recognize as either excitement or impending diplomatic catastrophe. This is unprecedented, she murmured, her usual composure cracking. Royal declarations of intent haven't been made publicly in over 3 centuries. Intent for what, exactly? Kale managed to croak. Marriage, Lyrian replied matter-of-factly. She just proposed to you in front of the entire Valoran High Court. A tall figure materialized beside Lady Arinya's throne with a fluid grace of barely contained fury. Chancellor Thyros looked like someone had taken the concept of stern disapproval and given it pointed ears and formal robes. His ears, longer and more angular than most, actually seemed to crackle with static electricity. Your Highness, he said in a voice that could freeze plasma, perhaps we might discuss this sudden inspiration in private chambers? Lady Arinya turned toward him with a smile that could have powered a small starship. Oh, but Chancellor, where's the fun in that? Besides, the resonance fields have already broadcast my feelings to half the city. Trying to be private now would be like attempting to unring a bell made of crystallized sound. Kale felt his knees wobble. Broadcast to half the city? Lyrian nodded sympathetically. Valoran emotional resonance extends beyond the immediate vicinity when feelings are particularly intense. Right now, approximately 2 million citizens are experiencing second-hand romantic excitement. 2 million. Kale's voice climbed several octaves. Don't panic, Lyrian said quickly. It's not like they're experiencing your exact emotions. More like emotional background music. Think of it as the universe's most widespread mood lighting. Chancellor Thyros stepped forward, his expression suggesting he'd prefer to solve this situation with a large stick and minimal paperwork. Human delegation, perhaps you would join me in the Chancellor's chamber to discuss the implications of this situation. Ambassador Chen straightened into her full diplomatic mode. Of course, Chancellor. We're as surprised by this development as anyone. As they began moving toward a side corridor, Kale caught Lady Arinya's eye. She winked at him, actually winked, and the gesture was so unexpectedly human and mischievous that he nearly tripped over his own feet. The Chancellor's chamber turned out to be a spherical room with walls that swirled like liquid starlight. Thyrose gestured for them to sit in chairs that materialized from the floor itself, which Kale tried not to think about too hard. "Let me be direct," Thyrose began, his ears twitching with irritation. "Lady Arinya is spirited. She has a tendency toward dramatic gestures when she feels constrained by protocol. So this might not be serious?" Ambassador Chen asked hopefully. "Oh, it's quite serious," Thyrose replied grimly. "Valoran royal declarations, once made publicly, cannot be easily dismissed. The resonance fields have recorded her intent, and the emotional broadcast has already reached our furthest colonies. By tomorrow, every Valoran in the galaxy will know that their future empress has chosen a human mate." Kale made a sound somewhere between a squeak and a dying engine. "But I didn't agree to anything. Your emotional response was also broadcast," Thyrose continued relentlessly. "The readings show surprise, confusion, attraction, and what our sensors interpreted as bemused terror. The population finds this combination surprisingly endearing." "Bemused terror is endearing?" Lyrian leaned forward conspiratorially. "Valoran courtship traditionally involves elaborate displays of mutual uncertainty. Your reaction was textbook romantic by our standards." Through the chamber's translucent walls, Kale could see the city beyond pulsing with gentle pink and gold light. "Is that normal?" "The entire city is experiencing what you might call a romantic mood," Thyrose explained with the air of someone discussing a minor plague. "Productivity has dropped 15% as citizens keep stopping work to sigh wistfully. 3 marriage proposals have been registered in the past 10 minutes alone." Ambassador Chen rubbed her temples. "So what exactly are our options here?" "Lady Arinya could formally withdraw her declaration," Thyrose said slowly, "but doing so after such a public display would be seen as either cruel rejection or admission that her initial feelings were false. Either option would cause significant political complications." "And if we don't withdraw?" Kale asked weakly. Thyrose's ears actually drooped. "Then we begin preparations for the first interspecies royal wedding in Valoran history, while simultaneously renegotiating every trade agreement and diplomatic protocol between our civilizations." "No pressure," Chen muttered. A soft chime filled the chamber, and Lady Arinya's voice emanated from the walls themselves. "Chancellor, stop terrorizing my intended with worst-case scenarios. Kale, if you can hear this, I'll be in the Crystal Garden in an hour. We should probably actually meet properly before planning our honeymoon." The transmission cut off, leaving them in stunned silence. "Well," Lyrian said brightly, "at least she has a sense of humor about potentially destabilizing interstellar relations." An hour later, Kale found himself standing at the entrance to the Crystal Garden, wearing a fresh uniform and what he hoped was a confident expression rather than the look of someone who'd spent the last 60 minutes having a controlled panic attack in his quarters. The garden defied every botanical concept he'd ever learned. Trees grew in impossible spirals, their leaves shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that responded to his footsteps. Flowers that looked like they'd been crafted from living gemstones chimed softly in harmonious clusters, creating music that seemed to follow melodic rules he couldn't quite grasp. "You came," Lady Arinya's voice drifted from somewhere among the singing flora. "I wasn't entirely certain you wouldn't flee back to your ship and request immediate evacuation." Kale turned toward the sound and found her sitting on what appeared to be a bench grown from crystallized water. Up close, without the formal throne room atmosphere, she looked remarkably normal. Well, normal if you ignored the luminescent skin, the elegantly pointed ears that caught starlight like natural prisms, and the way small flowers seemed to lean toward her as if seeking attention. "The thought crossed my mind," he admitted, approaching cautiously. But Ambassador Chen pointed out that running away from an interstellar marriage proposal might qualify as a diplomatic incident. Arinya laughed, and the sound made nearby crystal chimes resonate in harmony. "Practical woman. I like her already. Please, sit before you wear a path in the grass. The garden's biomatrix is starting to interpret your pacing as a mating dance." Kale froze mid-step. "A what now?" "Rhythmic movement near potential partners," she explained with obvious amusement. Several species of Valeran wildlife express romantic interest through repetitive locomotion patterns. The garden sensors are getting confused. As if to prove her point, a cluster of flower creatures began swaying in time with his previous pacing, emitting what sounded disturbingly like romantic serenading. Right. Sitting. Good idea. He settled onto the bench, which adjusted its surface temperature to match his body heat. That's considerate furniture. Everything here responds to biological feedback. It's probably reading your stress levels and trying to help you relax. She tilted her head, studying him with those impossible violet eyes. Are you always this nervous, or is it just the prospect of accidentally starting an interplanetary incident? Both, actually. I'm what humans call socially awkward under normal circumstances. Adding alien royalty and galactic politics hasn't improved the situation. Good, she said firmly. I was hoping you weren't one of those perfectly polished diplomat types. They're dreadfully boring. A small creature that looked like a cross between a butterfly and a hologram landed on Kale's shoulder, tickling him with wings that felt like warm static electricity. Is this normal? The luminous moths are attracted to emotional honesty. The more genuine someone's feelings, the more they gather around. You're practically a beacon right now. She gestured to where at least a dozen of the creatures were settling in his hair and on his uniform. It's rather charming, actually. I'm being mobbed by truth-detecting insects. This is definitely not in my job description. Arinya's expression grew more serious, though her eyes still held traces of humor. Kale, may I call you Kale? I should probably explain about earlier. The public declaration wasn't entirely planned. Not entirely planned? Well, I knew I was going to say something. I've been watching the Earth delegation's arrival for weeks through our monitoring systems, and you interested me. But I'd intended something more subtle. Perhaps a private invitation to dinner, some carefully orchestrated conversations, the traditional Valeran courtship protocols. Kale felt his eyebrows climbing toward his hairline. What changed? You asked Lyrian if our city was alive. She leaned closer, and he caught a scent like ozone and starflowers. That question showed genuine curiosity about our world, not just diplomatic politeness. And when you entered the hall, the resonance fields picked up something I hadn't expected. My terror. Your wonder. Beneath all that nervousness, you were genuinely amazed by what you saw. Most visitors are either intimidated or calculating political advantages. You were enchanted. The halls haven't responded to pure wonder like that in decades. The luminous moths around them began glowing brighter, apparently approving of the conversation's direction. Kale tried to process what she was saying while a tiny holographic butterfly used his ear as a perch. So you proposed marriage because I liked your architecture? I proposed marriage because in that moment, standing in our most sacred space, you reminded me that beauty exists to be appreciated, not just displayed. And because the thought of you leaving without ever really seeing our world made the entire hall resonate with loneliness. My loneliness, which I hadn't even realized I was feeling until it echoed back from the crystals. The garden around them pulsed with soft golden light, the same color that had filled the throne room during her declaration. Kale realized the entire environment was responding to their conversation like a living mood ring. That's actually very romantic, he said slowly. Terrifying and politically complicated, but romantic. I'm glad you think so, because according to Chancellor Thyros, we have about 17 different cultural committees demanding meetings to discuss potential wedding protocols. Apparently, no one's entirely sure how to blend human and Valeran marriage customs. Kale choked slightly. Wedding protocols? We just met an hour ago. 2 hours, she corrected. And technically, by Valeran law, my public declaration has already initiated the bonding process. We're currently in what translates roughly to engagement pending mutual compatibility assessment. Which means we have 30 days to determine if we actually like each other enough to make this official, or if this was just a case of spectacular mutual attraction amplified by resonance field feedback. A new voice interrupted from the garden's entrance. Your Highness, I hate to disturb this touching scene, but we have a situation. Lyrian approached, her usual composure replaced by barely controlled excitement. The Earth Alliance has just transmitted an official response to today's events. Already. Kale stood up, dislodging several disappointed luminous moths. What did they say? Lyrian grinned. Quote, Earth Command is delighted by this unprecedented opportunity for cultural exchange and formally grants Attaché Thompson extended diplomatic leave to explore this new frontier in interspecies relations. End quote. Arinya clapped her hands together, causing a small explosion of harmonious chimes from the nearby flower clusters. Wonderful. They've essentially given us permission to see if we're compatible. They threw me under the bus, Kale translated weakly. Don't be so dramatic, Arinya said, standing and linking her arm through his. They gave us a chance to see if the universe has a sense of humor about impossible things. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? The garden's crystalline trees began glowing brighter, and somewhere in the distance, Kale could hear what sounded like celebration music drifting from the city proper. I'm starting to think, he said, watching the luminous moths form heart-shaped patterns in the air around them, that I really shouldn't have asked that question. 29 days later, Kale stood in the Nexus chamber, surrounded by crystalline formations that hummed with energies that made his teeth itch and his hair stand on end. The chamber itself defied physics in ways that had given Chief Science Officer Martinez 3 migraines and a renewed appreciation for the phrase, impossible but happening anyway. Are you absolutely certain about this? Chancellor Thyros asked for the 7th time in 10 minutes. His ears had developed a nervous twitch that made them flicker like agitated antennae. The harmony of intentions hasn't been performed with a non-Valeran subject in over a millennium. We're not entirely sure what will happen when we connect your neural patterns to our resonance matrix. Worst-case scenario? Kale asked, adjusting the peculiar headband device that felt like wearing a crown made of crystallized lightning. Your consciousness could be scattered across 17 dimensions. Your memories might become public property, or you could accidentally broadcast your deepest fears to the entire star system, Thyros replied with characteristic cheerfulness. Those are the worst-case scenarios. Oh no, those are just the moderately concerning possibilities. The worst case involves temporal loops and spontaneous poetry generation. Ambassador Chen, observing from the safety of the shielded viewing area, made a sound somewhere between laughter and hysteria. I'm definitely recommending hazard pay for this assignment. Lady Arinya approached, wearing ceremonial robes that seemed to be woven from starlight and sporting her own neural interface crown. Over the past month, Kale had discovered that beneath her otherworldly elegance, she possessed a wicked sense of humor and an alarming tendency to introduce him to Valeran cuisine that fought back. Ready? She asked, taking his hand. Her touch still made the surrounding crystals pulse with that warm golden light that had become their signature emotional frequency. Define ready, Kale replied. Because if it means prepared for psychic brain melding with alien technology, then absolutely not. If it means willing to try anyway because I've grown surprisingly fond of you despite your people's alarming tendency to turn everything into a musical light show, then yes. The luminous moths that had become his constant companions over the past weeks began gathering around them in excited spirals. Kale had learned to interpret their behavior patterns. Rapid spirals meant approval, slow figure eights indicated confusion, and the heart-shaped formations they were forming now meant they sensed strong positive emotions. Initiating resonance field activation, announced the chamber's AI in a voice that sounded like wind chimes having an intellectual discussion. Please remain calm and try not to think about embarrassing childhood memories. Why would you tell me not to? Kale began, but his words were cut off as the chamber filled with a sound like the universe humming in perfect harmony. The connection hit him like a warm wave of liquid starlight. Suddenly, he wasn't just Kale Thompson, diplomatically awkward human from Earth. He was also experiencing flashes of Arinya's memories. Centuries of formal ceremonies, the loneliness of royal duty, the moment she'd first seen him through the monitoring systems and felt something she'd forgotten how to recognize, hope. But the neural link worked both ways. Through their connection, Arinya experienced his memories of growing up on a small farming colony, his genuine fascination with other cultures, his deep-seated fear of letting people down, and his complete bewilderment at finding himself in love with someone whose ears glowed when she laughed. Oh dear! Lyrian's voice drifted through the psychic maelstrom. The resonance cascade is reaching beyond the chamber. Half the city just experienced simultaneous romantic nostalgia. Through the neural link, Kale felt Arinya's amusement mixing with his own panic. Their combined emotional response created a feedback loop that turned the chamber into a light show that could probably be seen from orbit. "Is it always this intense?" he managed to ask, though he wasn't sure if he spoke aloud or just thought very loudly. "Only when both parties are genuinely compatible," Arinya replied, her mental voice warm with laughter. "The resonance amplifies truth. If we weren't actually falling in love, the connection would feel neutral, maybe slightly pleasant. And what we're experiencing now is either true love or the most spectacular psychic malfunction in recorded history." The chamber's crystals began resonating at frequencies that made reality shimmer around the edges. Through their shared consciousness, Kale could feel not just Arinya's emotions, but the entire city's response to their connection. 2 million Valerans were experiencing second-hand romantic bliss, productivity had ground to a halt, and at least 3 spontaneous festivals had erupted in various districts. "I'm going to take this as a positive sign," he said, watching the light patterns around them shift into configurations that looked suspiciously like wedding decorations. "The city approves," Arinya agreed. "Also, I can sense your memory of trying to cook pasta last week and somehow setting water on fire. I'm impressed and slightly terrified. That was an accident. Your kitchen equipment is apparently psychic and took my frustration with the recipe as a literal instruction to ignite." Their shared laughter created a resonance cascade that turned the chamber walls into a kaleidoscope of joy. Chancellor Thyros, monitoring from his station, looked like someone watching a beautiful disaster unfold in slow motion. "Neural integration complete," the AI announced. "Compatibility assessment. Unprecedented. Emotional resonance. Off the charts. Side effects, citywide euphoria and 3 marriage proposals between complete strangers." The energy field around them began to fade, but the connection remained, not the overwhelming psychic fusion of moments before, but a warm awareness of each other's presence that felt as natural as breathing. "Well," Kale said, removing his neural interface crown with shaking hands, "that was either the most romantic thing ever or the most elaborate scientific experiment in the history of the galaxy." "Why not both?" Arinya replied, her ears practically glowing with happiness. Ambassador Chen's voice crackled through the chamber's communication system. "Earth Command wants to know if we've just witnessed the first successful human-alien psychic bonding or if we need to prepare for diplomatic complications." "Tell them," Kale said, taking Arinya's hand and feeling the familiar warm pulse of crystalline response around them, "that they're invited to a wedding. And they might want to bring earplugs. I have a feeling Valeran celebration music is going to be energetic." Outside the chamber, the sounds of spontaneous city-wide celebration echoed through crystal corridors, and somewhere in the distance, the luminous moths were performing aerial ballet patterns that spelled out congratulations in 17 different languages. "You know," Kale said, watching reality settle back into something resembling normal around them, "when I took this job, I thought the worst that could happen was accidentally insulting someone's cultural practices. And instead you accidentally married into alien royalty and caused the most widespread emotional event in Valeran history." Arinya squeezed his hand. "I'd say you exceeded expectations." The chamber doors opened to reveal what appeared to be half the royal court waiting with expressions ranging from delighted to bewildered. Chancellor Thyros stepped forward, his ears finally relaxed for the first time in a month. "Your Highnesses," he said with a bow that managed to convey both respect and resignation, "shall we begin planning the wedding that's apparently going to reshape interstellar relations?" "Absolutely," they replied in unison, their voices harmonizing in a way that made the crystal walls sing. The end.